To who?
For conspiracy to kidnap
Who?
Holly Willoughby.
I think those ones have
Okay, where's that come from?
And so what you just saw there was the arrest of an absolute monster called Gavin Plumb. What Gavin would plot and plan against Holly Willoughby was horrendous. And we're going to break it down in this video. So to start with this story, we've really got to look at Gavin when he was younger. Gavin Plumb was born on the 25th of February 1987, and he was born into the hometown of Essex in the United Kingdom. He attended a school in Harlow, and despite not having many friends in school, well, the early years of his school were quite plain sailing. So how would Gavin Plumb end up with a criminal history spanning back around 20 years before the attack on Holly Willoughby? As you saw from the video at the beginning, Gavin Plumb at the time of the arrest was around 35 stone. And this was no different at school. So Gavin, through his early years, he was quite a heavy person. And this would lead him on to becoming bullied and also socially isolated as a person. His relationship with his mother was quite good. However, his relationship with his biological father was said to be strained. And to mention, Gavin also grew up with two older brothers. He did himself later become a father. Again, we're going to need to touch on that later on in the video. It's important not to suggest that being bullied or isolated as a child makes somebody commit or attempt to commit these horrendous crimes. So looking at this 20-year criminal history, we've got to go back to the year of 2009. Gavin Plumb would be working as a ticket officer on the Stansted Express, which was essentially a train service. Gavin Plumb, in his crazy mind, so he wouldn't just go around collecting tickets like any other ticket inspector. He had a plan, and this plan was of the most horrific nature. What Gavin Plumb did on two separate occasions was to try and kidnap two women. So let's break these down for you. The first occasion, Gavin Plumb walks down a train. He notices and spots that there's a aerostess that's finished her shift and is on the way home on the Stansted Express. He decides to approach the lady and tell her that he's got a gun and that she needs to follow him. Gavin Plumb was attempting to kidnap this aerostess. By some stroke of luck, she manages to make eye contact with two other male attendees that were on the train at the time. They quickly figure out what's going on and they attempt to approach Gavin Plumb, but before they can do so, he absconds the train. Of course, police reports were made, but no follow-ups were then carried through. And so this gave Gavin Plumb a second opportunity at the exact same crime. And he would target yet again another air hostess. On this second occasion, he would again spot this lady that was sat on her own. Again, by some stroke of luck for him, she was an air hostess. He then approached her again and told her, "You must come with me. I've got a gun, and if you don't, I'm going to shoot you and I'm going to shoot myself." And so on this occasion, she does initially start to follow Gavin Plumb. But whilst Gavin Plumb has his back to her, she quickly makes a bolt and she manages to escape from Gavin. Again, police reports were made. However, this time they found Gavin Plumb. Now, it turns out that the story was that Plumb was imitating a police officer. And when the police caught up with him, so that very same day, only about 30 minutes later, because let's be honest, Gavin Plumb is not a person that could go missing quite easily. Well, they catch up with him and they find that he's got three things on his person. He's got an imitation firearm, so essentially a fake gun. He's got ligature ropes and he's got notes on what he was planning to do with this person. Gavin Plumb was found guilty of kidnapping offences. However, he was not sent to prison. He was given a 12-month suspended sentence with 2 years supervision. This was the very first major warning sign in Plumb's criminal history. Just 2 years later, in the year of 2008, Gavin Plumb, don't ask me how he managed to do this, but he managed to bag himself a job as a security officer in the very well-known and renowned Woolworths. At this time, he was now 21 years old. He'd had that stint of criminal history regarding kidnap previously. And again, he was now working in the Woolworths shop of Harlow. On this one occasion, Gavin Plumb was working along 2 very young store assistants. Now, it was reported and said to be that Gavin Plumb placed himself on this night shift so he could specifically work alongside these 2 store assistants. Gavin Plumb again decided he was going to kidnap these 2 store assistants. So what he did is he waited until almost the dead of night. It was around midnight. He approached the 2 girls and he told them that he needed their help in the stockroom. The girls walked ahead and Gavin was quickly behind them. As the girls entered the stockroom, Gavin pulled out of his pocket a bladed weapon. Again, he's got ligature ropes and tape on him. He tapes the girls' hands and he tells them that they're being kidnapped and that they're going to be coming with him. Remember, at this time, he's only 21 years old and he's already got this previous criminal history surrounding kidnap. He was a very dangerous person from even his early years. Well, Gavin Plumb being Gavin Plumb, he couldn't follow through with this horrendous crime that he tried to put these 2 people through. One of the girls managed to escape the stockroom. They sounded the alarm. And again, what did Gavin Plumb do? He decided to take off. But on this occasion, it wasn't like the Stansted Express. He had signed up for this job. Woolworths knew who Gavin Plumb was. Of course, they'd done their background checks, they got his ID, and they knew where he lived. And so when the police arrived and the girls explained that it was Gavin Plumb, the security officer, that had done this to them, well, the police, they quickly visited his home and they were to arrest Gavin Plumb. Gavin Plumb was found guilty of false imprisonment. He was sentenced to 32 months in prison and he was to serve half of that custody sentence. And so, just by the age of 21, Gavin Plumb had been involved in 2 very serious crimes against women, one of which was kidnap and one of which was false imprisonment. And so what did Gavin Plumb do after this stint in prison? Well, he was to return to Essex, and again, somehow, he was to return to a security job role. He decided that maybe enough was enough. He got together with a woman and he had 2 children with this woman. However, it was said to be that at this point in his life, he was becoming extremely isolated and he was gaining significant weight. And as I mentioned at the beginning of the video, at the time of his arrest, he was around 35 stone. That's approximately 226 kilograms. In 2018, Gavin Plumb was to go through surgery to try and lose this weight. He had fitted a gastric sleeve and he did lose quite a bit of weight. I think he got down to around 26 stone. However, he quickly gained that weight back on. And around this time, Gavin Plumb was becoming a notorious addict, let's say, for online activity. What was he doing? Was he browsing social media? Was he playing online games? No, he was becoming obsessed with Holly Willoughby. And for anybody that doesn't know who Holly Willoughby was, well, she was very well known for TV presenting on the ITV hit show This Morning. And again, she'd presented a number of game shows like Dancing on Ice. However, Gavin Plumb's obsession, well, it wasn't an innocent obsession. He wasn't just obsessed with watching episodes of This Morning. No, his obsession was something deep, horrible, and sadistic. What Plumb decided to do over the next couple of years was to collect a large number of photos that were of Holly Willoughby. What the court found that Plumb had almost tens of thousands of these photos of Holly Willoughby, and again, these were initial innocent photos, but what Gavin Plumb was doing, he was creating something called deep fake videos or deep fake photos of Holly Willoughby. And what this essentially is he was taking the face of Holly Willoughby and he was putting them on to different people. Now, of course, I'll let you work out in your minds exactly what that would have looked like. But for Gavin Plumb, this was clearly becoming an obsession and a fantasy for him. He joined an online forum, and basically Gavin Plumb was almost the leader of this online forum where they would discuss sort of devious crimes and devious things about certain people. And on this online forum, he managed to set up a channel whereby a number of members were to join him. Again, he was the leader of this channel, and he was discussing the kidnap of Holly Willoughby. And I'm not talking just a off comment by Gavin Plumb to say, I think I'll kidnap Holly Willoughby. No, he was planning this. He was planning this to a level and a degree of somebody that was so obsessed and so sadistic and was so zoned in on the task that he had created, to the point of which he knew very specific details about Holly Willoughby, her whereabouts, her homes, the CCTV footage that was around her home. He was no longer just talking about a random celebrity with a light obsession. This was now a woman who lived at a specific home. He had got plans of her home drawn out. He was sharing it online with other people. He was trying to some degree form a group of people that would be involved in this potential kidnap of Holly Willoughby. And so what the courts found was that Gavin Plumb put together this devious plan, again in some great detail. The plan was that he was going to firstly restrain Holly Willoughby in her own home. He was then going to kidnap her and take her to a different location. He was then going to assault Holly Willoughby, and then he was planning to murder her. He also suggested in this online forum that he was going to get Holly Willoughby to sign some sort of disclosure form to say that she had agreed to go along with him. Now, I'm not being funny. If it had got to that point, I mean, you take a look at Gavin Plumb. Does this look like a man that Holly Willoughby would sign a disclosure form for to go along with him willingly herself? I think not. But Gavin Plumb, he was so caught up with all of what he created, and he was so zoned in and obsessed that this plan was going to take place and he was going to be successful. Well, the footage that you saw at the beginning of the video was, of course, the arrest of said Gavin Plumb. Now, when the police arrived at his home, they arrested him, and of course, they began their search for evidence at his property. What they found was a lot of evidence. So again, all of these photographs of Holly Willoughby, tens of thousands of photographs, tens of thousands of these deep fake photos and videos that he created and posted online. He also had a number of weapons in his house that were said to be used for this attempted kidnap of Holly Willoughby. There was cable ties, there was again ligature ropes, tape, and notwithstanding, he also had chloroform in his property. So he was making preparations for what he was about to do. But of course, with Gavin Plumb's size at 35 stone, I mean, to some degree, it might have been impossible for him to not just take part, but make this plan successful and to carry it out. And in my opinion, I think this is why he started and became the leader of an online forum, to draw people in and to hopefully get them involved in the kidnap of Holly Willoughby. So I know your question, well, how did they find out that Gavin Plumb was planning this? And how did they find out that he was a leader of an online forum involving the kidnap of Holly Willoughby? Well, this brings in an undercover police officer who joined Gavin Plumb's forum. So he was to join this online group, and essentially Gavin Plumb was trying to involve this undercover police officer. And so he was divulging all of this information to the undercover police officer. He was giving him the plan to Holly Willoughby's house. He was telling him how he planned to enter Holly Willoughby's house. He was planning to use this chloroform on both Holly and her partner, and how he was planning to kidnap her, assault her, and eventually commit the horrendous crime of murder. And so this information was passed on to the British police, and they then concluded their investigation and decided to arrest Gavin Plumb. So Gavin Plumb was arrested, he was investigated, and he was charged with 3 very serious offences. He was charged with soliciting a murder. He was charged with assisting and encouraging kidnap. He was also charged with encouraging and assisting an assault beginning with R. Gavin Plumb, well, he didn't stop there. He didn't just say, well, yes, initially this is what I wanted to do. He tried to argue that this was only a fantasy in his head and that he was not going to carry out this crime. But the prosecution and the courts, they were to see this very differently. And so on the 14th of July, 2024, Gavin Plumb was sentenced to a lifetime imprisonment with a minimum term of 16 years to serve. So eventually, this absolute monster, Plumb, was arrested and convicted. But in my opinion, it was probably not timely enough, because remembering Gavin Plumb had a criminal history spanning almost 20 years before the eventual plan of kidnap against Holly Willoughby. From a very early age, Gavin Plumb was obsessed with kidnap and almost having this authority over women.